Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dime Sportsbook and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 73 event, which takes place in Nashville, Tennessee. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 5 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 190 and World Series of Fighting 22 went 1-2 to lose 1.46 units overall. We won our bet on Damian Maia, but lost our underdog bet on Leandro Issa, and Delano Lopez also killed our 2-unit parlay with his loss. We also lost a 1-unit free bet parlay on Jake Shields with Hugo Viana. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 73 features a 13-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 2, and Fox Sports 1 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass, we have Anthony Christodoulou, who is 12-5, taking on Scott Holtzman, who is 7-0. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Holtzman minus 555, the comeback on Christodoulou, plus 365. And right now over at 5 Dimes, it is Holtzman minus 750. The comeback on Christodoulou is plus 525. All lines, of course, are always courtesy of our sponsor, 5dimes.eu. So make sure you guys check those guys out. And as far as the matchup goes, I mean, the initial action on Holtzman does not really surprise me too much. I mean, if you look at Christodoulou's UFC debut against Taisimov, wasn't that impressive. Against steep competition, of course. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, he was expected to lose that fight, expected to probably honestly get finished by Taisimov as well, and that's exactly what happened. Just outclassed, honestly, more than anything else. The kid definitely, Christodoulou, has some potential. I mean, obviously he was training in Europe and Greece, and just that country in general overall is a little bit behind the MMA scene as far as training, as far as, you know, the abilities that some of these other countries are a little bit farther ahead. So, he had some strikes, and he has some strikes going against him right now. And part of that is just, again, the proper training that he needs to compete at the highest level. Where Holtzman, on the other hand, is definitely getting more of that solid training. Now, Holtzman, of course, he's got a little bit of hype and a little bit of buzz coming into his UFC debut. The UFC did sign him a little while back, so they've been kind of sent him on the shelf here, and officially he's making his debut this weekend. But Holtzman has been an outstanding competitor. I mean, XFC on Access TV, he's got a lot of fights under that banner, and he's had a lot of success under that banner as well. So Holtzman is another one of these guys that a lot of people anticipated and couldn't wait for him to make his UFC debut, and here it finally is. Now, he's a very aggressive, strong fighter, pushes a high pace, pretty well-rounded in all areas, decent power on the feet with his striking. He's got decent wrestling. He's got some subs to go along with it. And how it really comes down to in this fight against Christodoulou is Holtzman's just a little bit better everywhere. I think Christodoulou, his best chance to win this fight, I don't think he's going to be able to control the tempo of the fight or dictate, the pace, or even give Holtzman a lot of problems anywhere. I think his best shot is maybe in the clinch, maybe landing, that kind of lucky shot on Holtzman, dropping him, kind of putting him out that way. But other than that, I mean, Holtzman should be able to outpoint him. He should be able to, again, control the octagon a little bit here, and he should be able to honestly have the speed on the feet, land a little bit more, a little bit cleaner, I should say, as well. And then on the ground, I think he's going to have the advantages there. So anywhere this fight takes place really is a win for Holtzman. That's why you're seeing him with this outrageous kind of number, especially in his UFC debut. But it is what it is against the level of competition he's facing here. So unfortunately for Christodoulou, I don't think his second fight in the UFC is going to go much better than the first. He's going to need to pull something really miraculous out to win this fight, but I do think Holtzman will win this fight, and he'll probably slowly move up the UFC rankings and ladder at 155. But that is a shark filled, infested division. I mean, there's so many talented guys at 155, so it's going to be a difficult division for either one of these guys to have a lot of success. But that being said, Holtzman definitely has a better shot. So I'm going to pick Holtzman to get the win over Chrisad, probably maybe by late finish. If not, I think he wins a pretty clear-cut decision.
Yeah, I definitely like Holtzman here. He was actually signed by the UFC a year ago, but just hasn't made his debut yet due to some injuries, some scheduling conflicts, stuff like that. And Chrisad, he's a guy that made his UFC debut on short notice against Teixeira and got blistered. So I just don't expect anything better for him. I mean, he's more of a late replacement type of fighter that the UFC signed. Holtzman is a guy that the UFC had their eye on, and he trains out of a great gym with the MMA lab. He's working with elite lightweights like Benson Henderson, and then plenty of other guys like Efrain Escudero and all those guys over at the lab. Now, in terms of the pure matchup, Chrisad, he has decent boxing skills, but I think Holtzman is going to be the better boxer. He's the more aggressive fighter, so Holtzman will keep Chrisad on his back foot most likely. And in terms of a grappling game, I expect Holtzman, if he wants, to get inside, maybe get a trip takedown or something, and then just start pounding away on Chrisad, because he does have some excellent striking on the ground as well. So all in all, Holtzman is just the better overall fighter. And while he is still young in his MMA career, he has had a full year since the announcement of his UFC signing to sharpen and hone his skills. And I just don't think Chrisad is going to offer too much here. So I expect Holtzman to pressure him on the feet and either win a decision with points, or he could finish him. So Holtzman is definitely the better fighter in my opinion, and I think he makes an impressive UFC debut. So Holtzman is my pick. Now dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Marlon Vera, who is 6-2-1, taking on Roman Salazar, who is 9-3 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Salazar, minus 130. The comeback on Vera, minus 110. So virtually a pick 'em with the slightest lean towards Salazar. Line actually flipped. It's Vera minus 125, Salazar plus 105 right now. So almost the same type of line, just flipped the other way, staying near pick'em as well. And this is going to be a very competitive fight. I really do believe that. Vera, of course, the Ultimate Fighter vet. There was a little bit of buzz. I mean, from the Latin America show, he was supposed to be one of the better fighters. He just, I think, hasn't really showed his capabilities yet. Now he is, of course, training at Greg Jackson's camp and crew. So I think he's going to be one of these guys. He's only 22 years old, so he is going to constantly improve and show a little bit better than he has thus far. Now, Salazar, on the other hand, another guy that honestly made his debut and hasn't looked all that great. I know a lot of people were expecting him to lose to Mitch in his official debut, and then against Yamamoto, a lot of people were actually expecting that to be a great spot for him to come in against the fading, declining Yamamoto and pull off an impressive win. But honestly, he didn't look that great in that fight either. Yamamoto was looking pretty good before that accidental eye poke happened, and it ended up being no contest. So Salazar was probably on his way, I think, to being 0-2 in that in the UFC. Vera, of course, again, hasn't really fared much better, but I do think that Vera has a little bit more upside and a little bit more potential. I think he's still developing his skill set on the feet. He's aggressive. At times he's aggressive. He still has, that hesitation at times as well. But overall, he mixes everything up okay. He has a pretty solid kicking game, likes to use that as part of his arsenal as well. His hands aren't bad. They're still developing a little bit more as well. But then on the ground, he's got some okay submission skill to go along with it as well. He's starting to be a little bit more aggressive on the ground, but the problem with Vera is still his fight IQ. He's still a little raw. He makes some mistakes, gets himself put in bad spots, and that could come back to haunt him, especially with Salazar because he's a little bit more of a savvy vet. Again, he hasn't really showcased what he can do, but Salazar is a pretty well-rounded fighter, but he's one of those guys that honestly has skill everywhere, but again, he doesn't really, strike fear in his opponents by just being dominant in any particular area. And as far as finishing ability, honestly, I think Vera is probably a little bit more of the capable finisher in this spot. And I think he probably will have success against Salazar. If it hits the scorecards, I think this is going to be a really competitive fight. Again, it's a pick 'em fight, so we're expecting it to be competitive. It could realistically go either way, but I do lean a little bit more towards Vera. Even on the scorecards, or if there's going to be a finish, I lean towards Vera as well. I just don't think that Salazar is going to get the job done against Vera, and I think there is potential for Vera possibly to catch Salazar along the way. So, in my opinion, Vera is the type of fighter that's going to continue to improve, and Salazar is almost plateaued, and if anything, he's just going to be a fighter that the UFC throws in there. If he does lose his fight, he might get cut. If not, they'll probably throw him with somebody else and probably gets another loss. So he's not going to probably stay in the UFC that long, and Vera at least, again, has a little bit more potential. So it should be a close fight, competitive fight. You can't be overly confident here, but Vera's going to be slightly longer. He's going to be, I think, slightly a little bit more talented. He's a little bit more athletic. He's got, I think, overall the better camp behind him as well. So I think he wins this fight. So I am going to pick Vera to win, and probably maybe by late finish, if not by close competitive decision.
Vera is a pretty talented fighter. He was out of Tough Latin America. He was on the Latin America side, not the Mexico team, and he is originally from Ecuador, but he does do his training, as Nick mentioned, at Jackson's MMA. Now, the big question here, of course, is whether or not he's getting all the full attention from, the elite coaches at Jackson's, or if he's just working with some of the side guys, because, they can only spread out their information and everything to so many people at the top level. Now, Vera is very young also. He's only 22 years old, so he's definitely a sponge at this point in his career. He can soak up as much information as possible and just try to continue to evolve and improve. And I definitely expect him to take a leap in between his UFC debut and this fight. We've seen that a lot from a lot of the tough Latin America guys, where they've looked significantly better in their second octagon appearances compared to their first. So I would expect Vera to show up and look really solid. I mean, he has a decent jiu-jitsu game. He has an okay wrestling game. And I think he's an excellent striker as well. So, he's kind of the complete package. He just needs a little more confidence and just to start sharpening and honing those techniques. Now, against a guy like Salazar, that's actually like the perfect opponent for him, because Salazar isn't the most dangerous guy. He's got a little bit of power. He's a decent striker, but he's not the most well-rounded. He's not the most dangerous. He's definitely more of a bottom-of-the-barrel type of a UFC bantamweight. So as long as Vera has evolved a little bit since that UFC debut, I expect him to outpace Salazar on the feet. And I definitely think his ground game could come into effect here. And as long as he doesn't make a mistake, then I expect him to have the better ground game than Salazar and work him over, maybe submit him. So I like Marlon Vera. Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Chris Dempsey, who is 11-2, taking on Jonathan Wilson, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Wilson minus 190, the comeback on Dempsey plus 150, and right now over at 5 dimes it's minus 170 for Wilson. The comeback on Dempsey still plus 150. So basically it went from a 40-cent line margin to a 20-cent. And I think we're not going to see a ton of action on this fight either way. There's a lot of question marks to be answered here. Wilson, of course, is making his official UFC debut. And then Dempsey, of course, is coming off a pretty solid win over Chuck Gordon in his last fight, a close competitive decision win. But at the same time, I don't know how much stock you can put in that, especially how Gordon has looked pretty bad recently as well. And then before that, of course, Dempsey losing to Latifi wasn't that impressive in that performance either. So he's basically 1-1 in the UFC, but that Latifi fight was at 205. And of course, again, the Gordon fight was at 185, more of his natural weight class. So he did rebound well, but this time he is moving back up to 205. So getting into this breakdown, basically we'll start off with Wilson first. Wilson is a hyped prospect. He comes from a good camp, Millennia MMA, but overall his competition level has been fairly weak thus far. And there's a lot of question marks surrounding him because I think more than anything else, he's a striking-based fighter. He's got a solid skill set on the feet for sure, but he still has some question marks on the ground, especially, stuffing takedowns, because Dempsey is your wrestling-based fighter. He's going to be looking to kind of grind Wilson out here. So it's going to be up to Wilson to see how this fight goes. If he can kind of keep Dempsey at bay, keep him at distance a little bit, and use basically his range and striking ability to make life miserable for Dempsey. Overall, for Wilson, he still has a raw skill set, like I mentioned, but he is athletic and powerful, and especially in the stand-up game, he's got 5 knockouts. Even if they're over weaker competition, he's got enough speed and power to definitely do some damage. He's got some decent accuracy from what I've seen thus far as well, and in the clinch, he's pretty good. He throws nice knees and elbows as well. So overall, I think Wilson definitely has some potential, especially if he can get his wrestling takedown defense in check, and it's pretty solid because he's going to have some success outstriking opponents at 205. He's still 26 years old, so he's relatively young, and he's got a lot of improving and upside to him. Now, Dempsey, on the other hand, he's more of your wrestling-based fighter, of course, as I mentioned. And what he looks to do, again, is kind of grind you out. He's more of your wrestling-based fighter. He'll kind of clinch up against the cage with you. He is aggressive at times on the feet. He's got a little bit of power. He's not really that fast, so I think Wilson can have some success picking him apart on the feet for sure. But Dempsey's going to look to slow this fight down. The only problem here is at 205, I don't think that is the right weight class. Obviously, 185, Dempsey's more comfortable there. He's taking this fight on short notice again. So if this fight does not hit the ground, if Dempsey cannot get Wilson on the ground, he's probably going to get beat. He's probably going to get knocked out. I think that's the way you need to lean here. And even though there's so many question marks concerning Wilson, it's tough as far as betting goes to really have too much confidence either way in this fight. But as far as a pure pick goes, I have to slightly lean towards Wilson. Tricky fight, but I think he probably does get the job done.
Yeah, just like Holtzman, Jonathan Wilson was actually signed to the UFC in late 2014. So he's had plenty of time to be preparing and training for his UFC debut. He's had to deal again just like a little bit of an injury problem, a little bit of a scheduling problem. But I think he's going to add a little bit of nice depth to the 205-pound weight class. Dempsey, on the other hand, he's a middleweight. His UFC debut was at light heavyweight, did not go well. He does not really have the body for a light heavyweight, so he just kind of packs on a little bit of extra fat to make the light heavyweight division and to be competitive against him. And I don't think that's going to work out very well for him here. At middleweight, at least, he's a little stockier and can push people around, but at light heavyweight, it has not been a positive thing. So against a guy like Jonathan Wilson, who is going to have a significant striking advantage, Dempsey needs to make this fight as ugly as possible. He needs to push Wilson into the fence. He needs to drag him to the ground. He needs to lay on top of him, even if he doesn't get a lot of things going on the ground, because honestly, Dempsey just is a bit of a limited fighter overall. I mean, he has a little bit of power, but not enough that I think it would really threaten Wilson unless he's in full mount, just raining bombs. So overall, Dempsey just needs to do whatever it takes to close the distance and take away Wilson's weapons. Because from distance, Wilson is very dangerous. He has decent kicks, but his boxing is definitely his strength. He has some really good power there. And if he can get on top of you on the ground, he can drop some bombs as well. So I expect Wilson to completely control the early portions of every round if this fight somehow does go the 3-round distance. And Dempsey's just going to do whatever it takes to get inside and pressure him and put him against the fence. And as long as Wilson's footwork is good, if he can keep using a lot of lateral movement, then he should be able to avoid those situations. It just all depends on how prepared he is and whether or not he's UFC caliber, because any pretty much UFC caliber light heavyweight is going to make mincemeat out of Chris Dempsey. They were probably planning on having Jonathan Wilson make a great UFC debut. He was originally expected to face Matt Van Buren, who is a very chinny guy that I think Wilson would have knocked out pretty quickly. So I think they're hoping that Wilson still does that to Dempsey, but Dempsey could play spoiler here with that wrestling. So it's all about whether or not Wilson can put away Dempsey before Dempsey can put him on the ground or put him against the fence. And I think he will. He trains out of a good gym with the Millennia MMA, and he has some good sparring partners, and I think that they're going to prepare him for what to expect against a guy like this, because guys like Lorenz Larkin have faced plenty of fighters like Chris Dempsey throughout their careers. So I expect Jonathan Wilson to not just win, but probably win by knockout at some point. So I like Jonathan Wilson as a pick. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 2 prelims, we have a bantamweight bout between Frankie Saenz, who is 10-2, and Serwin Kakai, who is 13-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Saenz, -130. The comeback in Kakai, -110. And right now it looks like it is Saenz still the slight favorite at -130 still. And then Kakai is +110. So again, line margins kind of tightened up a little bit. Went from a 40-cent line to a 20-cent line. Some two-way action coming in on this fight as well. In fact, earlier, just a few days ago, Saenz actually was up, I'd say near 2-1 or so at one point, and then kind of came back down to reality, and it was about $150, $160-ish for a while, and now some action coming back in on Kakai. So I think there's a lot of split opinions on this fight as well, and a lot of it honestly has to do with how impressive Sainz has looked. I mean, thus far, I think he came in to the UFC flying under the radar. A lot of people realized that he was a pretty talented guy, no doubt about it, but at the same time, how talented or at the level of this competition, the UFC, could he compete and hang? And then, of course, his win over Alcantara just kind of proved that he could. Sainz is your really a well-rounded fighter. I was going to say your typical wrestler, but he's more than that. I mean, Sainz has a little bit of everything. I mean, he's a veteran of the sport for sure. He's faced some solid competition. Again, he's 2-0 in the UFC, so now he's got some confidence behind him. He trains with Cejudo and crew, and training with the guy like that definitely should help Sainz regardless. So he's getting good quality training with decent training partners, and he has a well-rounded game. The best, I think, part of Sainz's game is his wrestling. I mean, that's what he used to beat Alcantara. He's got good cardio. He's got some effective boxing as well, so you can't really sleep on Sainz in any area. And he comes, he fights to win. He's very solid, dependable. You don't have to be too concerned about him. But in fights, if you do look at throughout his career, he has been tagged a few times. He's been rocked. He's been KO'd officially once as well. So if anything at all that you could say is concerning about Sainz, it's probably a little bit of his strike defense and his chin. Overall, he's pretty solid. He's pretty tough, though. So it is tough to get rid of him. It's not like he's got a totally terrible chin. I'm not saying that, but that is probably a flaw that I've noticed. Now, Kakai, on the other hand, honestly, if you go back and look at some footage before Kakai made his UFC debut, he's okay. He's fought decent competition again. But he wasn't overly impressive because, I mean, he had some flaws in his games as well. He is able to be put on his back, or at least on tape, he was able to not fend off. At times, he wouldn't fend off takedowns. He'd get stuck on his back, but it is hard to hold him down. And you could tell that he's been, working, and he was able to get back to his feet more times than not. On the feet, offensively, he wasn't bad, but a little bit inactive at times. And then his strike defense, he was another guy that's actually, even though he's got no official KO losses on his resume, he has been tagged and he has been rocked throughout his career as well. So, again, this was all footage before he entered his official UFC debut against Danny Martinez on short notice. But in that Martinez fight, I mean, again, he did take it on short notice, and he looked really good. He showed that his takedown defense is very solid. His offensive wrestling is actually better than most people, I think, realize. He is training with American Top Team now, so I think that's only going to elevate his game. His striking offense, he was a little bit more active. He was a little bit busier. So I really saw a lot of improvement from what I've seen before he made the UFC, his official debut, and then afterwards. I mean, already the time that he's worked with American Top Team, you could tell, has really done a lot of good for Kakai here. And in this fight with Sainz, I think it's going to be a good fight for him, because I think Sainz is going to struggle to get Kakai to the floor, and I honestly think Kakai is actually the better striker overall on the feet. He's got power. He uses everything. He mixes up things a little bit better than Sainz does as well, as far as pure striking. He mixes in good solid kicks. He's got a good clinch game to go along with it. Kakai is just a little bit more dangerous, I think, on the feet. And then again, offensively, he's not a bad wrestler either. So I think he is making improvements, and he's actually going to continue to make improvements fight by fight, because he's only 25 years old. So he's got a decent amount of experience for being a young fighter, training with a good camp right now. And I think this matchup with Sainz is close to a pick'em for a reason, because it is going to be a really competitive fight, back and forth type of fight. But I do lean more towards Kakai, because I think, again, his improvement level is going to show here. I think Sainz is going to struggle with the takedowns, and if he's a better striker, Kakai's probably going to get the job done here. So everything to me is lining up for Kakai to get the victory here, and Kakai to actually kind of move himself up the ladder right now, and that's pretty impressive. So I expect a lot of good things from Kakai, and I'm going to pick him in this fight over Sainz.
And while I completely understand the Kakai pick, he definitely is the more well-rounded fighter. I'd still like Sainz a bit. The main reason is Sainz is so aggressive, and he pushes a really high pace, and he has great wrestling, just extremely good wrestling. And he's been able to implement it in both of his UFC fights, including against a top 15 fighter in Yuri Alcantara. Now, against a guy like Kakai, it all depends on whether or not Kakai can stuff takedowns and then implement some of his own game, because Kakai definitely is a bit more dangerous in terms of pure boxing, pure striking ability, because he was able to really work over Danny Martinez in his UFC debut. And then in terms of the wrestling, Kakai does have really good wrestling, but I think Sainz should definitely be the better overall wrestler, the stronger wrestler. So it'll all be about whether or not Kakai can stuff those takedowns. And if he can't, then he's going to be thinking about it too much, and then Sainz will be able to get things going on the feet as well. Now, Sainz is not a great striker at all. I mean, he's just an aggressive striker. He pushes forward, and then once you start thinking about how to counter him on the feet in terms of his stand-up, then he'll shoot in and take him down. That's pretty much how he's been able to get anything going in both of his UFC bouts so far. Against Alcantara, he just weathered that early storm, and then Sainz has a great gas tank, and he just powered through Alcantara and kept him on his back and avoided submission. So his submission defense is pretty good as well, and was just able to outwork Alcantara, which was just a huge monumental win and got him into the top 15 in the rankings. And the UFC debut against Nolan Tickman really wasn't exactly UFC caliber, and Sainz just proved it with a really high pace and was actually the more aggressive fighter on the feet as well. So against a guy like Kakai, Sainz has to be careful not to walk into anything in terms of the stand-up. And one problem that Kakai has that actually will be a strength here is, his chin has not been the greatest historically. He's been rocked in a few fights, but Sainz really doesn't present a ton of power, so I don't expect Sainz to get a whole lot going on the feet. Kakai probably won't respect Sainz much on the feet either. It'll just all be about the wrestling. And at least for me, I think that Sainz' wrestling is going to be enough, but if he can't get the takedown, he could be in for a long night. So I'm very slightly leaning Frankie Sainz here. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Dustin Ortiz, who is 14-4, taking on Willie Gates, who is 12-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Ortiz minus 350, the comeback on Gates plus 250, and right now over at 5 dimes, it is Ortiz minus 440, the comeback on Gates is plus 350. So line climbing a little bit for Ortiz. Not really that surprised. I mean, styles make fights, and even though Gates looked really good in his recent win over Montague, there's still some question marks around his overall game. I mean, definitely Gates, again, another athlete. He's fast, he's explosive. He's got an overall game which is solid, and he's going to continue to get better for sure too, and especially now that he's 2 fights into his UFC career. Again, confidence level has to rise, especially coming off of a pretty outstanding performance like that. But unfortunately for Gates, I think one of his biggest flaws is honestly the ground game, and the ground game is where Ortiz really excels. Now, Ortiz is a very well-rounded fighter in his own right. He's got a little bit of striking to go along with good wrestling, but his sub-game is also legit. So I'm saying that he's going to have problems, or Gates will be, with Ortiz, because I think Ortiz is going to look to take Gates down. Even if Gates stuffs some early takedowns, eventually I think Ortiz is going to find the ground. And Ortiz is actually going to work to try to win this fight, to control. Ortiz has some really fun grappling to watch for sure. I mean, his fight with Borg, even though it was controversial, and I think he should have lost, still, I mean, it was impressive because Borg is such a high-level grappler. And I mean, Ortiz has proven it time and time again, and he's faced now some really high level competition obviously as well. So Ortiz is kind of in that mix at 125 where, he strings a couple wins together. He's probably going to get in line for a title shot. I mean, that's how good his skill set is. And really you can't argue it. I mean, the guy is a top notch fighter at 125 for sure. So Gates is just kind of basically trying to break in, to that upper echelon of fighters at 125. And it's going to be tough with Ortiz because again, styles makes fights. So I think on the feet, even though Gates will probably be, he will have some length for sure. He's going to have reach over Ortiz, and I think Gates is the more dangerous fighter. But I think Ortiz is speed, his ability to land on the feet as well. He's not bad. He obviously trains with Duke Rufus and crew. He can have some success on the feet as well. But more than anything else, Ortiz is a smart fighter. He's going to know that he's got to get inside, close the distance on Gates, push him up against the cage, look for some takedowns, and just do what he does best, and that's kind of grind him out, outpoint him, and probably decision him. Now, the factor here, though, is I think Ortiz could possibly win by submission. I mean, again, Gates has been sub 3 times throughout his career, so I think it's a very good chance that Ortiz does find a sub here. So that's why you're seeing Gates as a decent underdog, although even though he does have some definitely some decent skill and upside to him, I just think he's not ready for this level yet. So I think it's kind of pretty clear cut here. Ortiz is going to get the win, and it's going to be his ground game that does it.
Gates is stepping in on short notice, and he is coming off of a really impressive first-round finish of Montague, and I was actually there for that one. I mean, he really put it on Montague once he had him hurt. So I really like Willie Gates's killer instinct, and against somebody like Dustin Ortiz, I think it's going to really be necessary because Ortiz is very tough, very durable, and has this never give up attitude of constant forward pressure. And against a guy like Gates, who is very long and tall in the flyweight division, he could present a bit of a stylistic mismatch if he's able to utilize it properly. Gates has some power, and the problem here is that Gates really, if he doesn't knock you out, I think he loses decisions. Because Dustin Ortiz is going to look to close the distance. He has some above average wrestling in the flyweight division, and I expect him to look to get inside and then just start pounding on Gates both in the clinch and on the ground. Ortiz, against most guys that are not the elite level, like Benavidez in his last fight, he's able to outwork them. He's able to outpace them. And I expect Ortiz to want to get inside, close the distance, and he's actually a very active striker, both when he's inside, whether it's in the clinch, or just in transition, whether a fighter's getting up from a takedown or he's taking someone down. He's constantly throwing a lot of strikes, and he does a really good job with that. And the thing that I think really helps Ortiz here is the durability factor, because honestly, he's been in there against some really tough dudes in his UFC career already, including Benavidez in his last fight, and he really hasn't been hurt at all. He's just taken the shots and then kept coming forward. So against a guy like Gates that does hit hard and is at his best when he can rock you and then jump on you and finish you, I just think that Ortiz is going to be able to take Willie Gates' best shot. And Gates definitely slowed down in his last fight, in his UFC debut against John Moraga. And if Willie Gates doesn't put away Ortiz quickly, then I see Ortiz not just winning the end of the first round, but then dominating the second and then crushing the third and potentially getting a finish. Ortiz isn't exactly a huge finisher, but if Gates does tire, then I would expect Ortiz to really take over in a big way. So I really like Dustin Ortiz here. I think that his just overall well-roundedness to his game, and especially the wrestling, are going to be the biggest factors here. So I expect Ortiz to pull this one out. Now, moving up to the middleweight division, we have Chris Camoi, who is 21-10, taking on Tom Watson, who is 17-8. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up in Camoi, minus 175, the comeback on Watson, plus 135. And right now it is Camoi minus 155. Watson is still plus 135. So line margins tightened up a little bit, and there is two-way action coming in on this fight. Kind of a tough fight to call because of what we've seen really recently from both. I mean, Camoi's always been one of these warriors, in my opinion, that's game. He's ready to fight anybody, anytime. And he'll put on his best possible performance each time out. Now, again, he's in a situation where does he really dominate any particular area in the game? He really doesn't, but he is a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter, decent fight IQ, pushes a fairly decent pace overall as well, and he's just a tough out. So, I mean, you know what you're getting from him. He's going to show up. He's going to come to fight. Can he be outskilled? Yes, he can, but at the same time, he's going to win more than he loses. So Camoi's a very solid fighter. I have a lot of respect for him, like his attitude. There's nothing really too much bad to say about Camoi at all overall. So his fight with Watson here is going to be interesting because Watson has some advantages in this fight. One of them is not going to be reach. I mean, Camoi obviously has the reach advantage in this fight, so the length might cause a little bit of problems for Watson on the feet because of his strike defense. But Watson is definitely primarily known for his striking. He's a powerful striker. He does excel in a particular area, unlike Camoi, and that is the striking game. I mean, he's got some devastating knockout power overall. He's got takedown defense in most cases where he can keep the fight upright and do what he does best, and that is strike with his opponents. He has went from, back in the day he was training with Jackson's camp, of course, and that's actually helped him improve his overall game. And now he's training with TriStar as well, so his game should be at another level. But the truth is, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that Watson at age 33 might be hitting that spot where he's starting to decline a little bit because I was expecting a way better performance from him against Natal, and it just didn't really show up. It wasn't the Watson I was expecting to see. So for me, it looked like a worse version of Tom Watson than we're used to seeing. I mean, against Alvi, I think Watson was still a little better. He had his moments, his problems in that fight as well, but he still, I think, looked a little bit more capable and a little bit more upside to him at that spot. So that fight with Natal, just one fight ago, I know, but it just still, I think it dropped his stock a little bit. And there's some question marks to be raised now with Watson. I mean, he looks to be slowing down a little bit of fights. He looks, again, his defense kind of, is a concern a little bit because he's getting hit and he's getting rocked a little bit more than you'd like to see. But overall, I mean, he's a game fighter. And one thing that he's got going for him in this fight is Camoi does not have that crazy good knockout power. So will there be a finish in this fight? I kind of doubt it. I think we probably see this fight hit the scorecards. And if we do, that does favor Camoi because I think he's going to be the busier fighter. I think he is going to use his reach effectively enough that he's going to stay on the outside, land some shots on Watson along the way, and then maybe even up against the cage, they're going to both clinch up. I'm sure we'll see them jock for position back and forth a little bit. But I do think Camoi's probably going to get by with a close competitive decision win. So that's why I'm going to lean towards Camoi. I could be wrong. Maybe we see Watson show up and he looks a little bit better again. But if we see the Watson that we saw against Natal, he's going to lose his fight to Camoi. So I am going to pick Camoi in this spot.
Historically, Camoi's biggest problems in terms of fighters he's had trouble against have been guys that are really quick, that use great footwork on the feet, guys like Lorenz Larkin, or guys that'll just take him down and dominate him. So against a guy like Tom Watson, that's not a problem. Like, Watson's really not that fast on the feet. He's a bit slower paced, more methodical, and then he doesn't really use the ground game much at all. Like, he's actually trying to avoid going to the canvas at most points. So I really feel like Camoi has a good shot here. Watson did not look good in his last fight, as Nick mentioned, and it was more than that. I mean, he just seemed lost out there. He didn't showcase nearly any power. He couldn't get rolling with anything. He was constantly having to fend off takedowns. And on top of that, Natal was actually out striking him too. So it was just a really frustrating performance if you're a Tom Watson fan. Now against Camoi, he's not going to have to worry about the takedown, but Camoi does offer something that is going to be a problem for Watson, which is he pushes a really high pace. He lands a lot of strikes. And while he doesn't have a lot of power, he can just outwork you over the course of 3 rounds. Camoi usually has pretty good cardio, so I would expect him to just push forward and keep Watson moving backwards and just make him defensive. Watson's at his best when he's either on the outside landing some good kicks, because that's actually how he got his win over Sam Alvi. He just landed a lot of early kicks, and that built up some damage that paid off a little bit later. And I don't think Camoi is going to give him that space. And then he's also fantastic in the clinch. I've brought this up multiple times. Tom Watson does some of the best clinch work in the UFC. But I don't know if Camoi is going to let him do that either. Camoi's a big guy and very strong, and he should be able to be the one pushing forward, so it'll be less likely that Watson's going to be able to turn it around and push him into the fence, unless Camoi makes some serious footwork mistakes. I just feel overall that Camoi's conditioning is going to be on point and the pace is going to be too high. And Watson is 5 years older than Camoi and has taken a bit of damage throughout his career. So I just think Camoi outworks him here and wins a decision. So my pick is Chris Camoi. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, these guys actually look pretty similar on paper. They're not, big time knockout artists in terms of one punch KO power, and they're not especially accurate and technical in the striking. They actually have identical power striking accuracy. But Camoi is a little bit more assertive and aggressive in initiating exchanges. He tends to outwork his opponents, even though he's not exactly involved in barn burners. Tom Watson arguably has been involved in the faster fights. But Chris Camoi is showing better defense, and that's pretty key. So these guys, I think, when they go toe-to-toe, Camoi is not going to be eating the same punches that Watson is, and Camoi has the longer range. He's going to have a reach advantage. He's younger. I just think per exchange, Camoi is coming out a little bit better each time. Now on the ground, neither one of these guys attempt many takedowns at all. I don't expect that to be a big part of this fight. But you did mention the clinch, Brian, and both these guys actually do spend a fair bit of time in the clinch, about 20% of their fight time, and they are both very accurate. What's interesting is that Chris Camoi is actually the more dominant position guy in the clinch. He tends to be pushing his opponents against the fence, at least more successfully than Tom Watson. Tom Watson is above average, but Camoi is actually way above average there. So if it does go to the clinch, Camoi is a tall, more fit guy, maybe arguably. So at least as the fight goes on, I think his Colorado altitude training might come into play. I don't see an early finish either way here. That's just not the way these guys fight. I do see it back and forth, lots of standing exchanges, maybe some clinch work, lots of struggling for position. But I do see enough edges for Camozzi to give him the lean here. But I also think it's probably going to a decision, and it should be pretty close.
Now, sticking with the middleweight division, we have Uriah Hall, who is 11-5, taking on Aloel Bambose, who is 5-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Hall minus 280, the comeback on Bambose, plus 200. And right now it's Hall minus 420, the comeback on Bambose, plus 335. Am I surprised that early action is coming in on Hall? No, I am not. It seems like always with the Uriah Hall fight, just the public and the bettors out there just simply love him. I mean, they realize what kind of skill set and potential Hall really has. I mean, on the feet, he's got knockout power. He's a very skilled striker. On the ground, he's got, honestly, underrated wrestling, offensively and defensively. Decent takedown defense. He just has the ability to honestly make a run at a title if he strings everything together. And people are just kind of expecting that out of him. But look at it closer. Man, does the guy let you down. I mean, he underperforms time and time again. He's just inactive at times. His fight IQ kills you at times as well. He does have all the ability in the world. It's just, he just can't string it together and be aggressive enough to actually pull off some wins that he needs. I mean, throughout his career, it's just so far it seemed like that, especially all the hype and everything, coming into the UFC from the Ultimate Fighter. A lot of people were just expecting this guy to be a monster. I mean, look at all the fighters, Dana White, everybody's saying all the good stuff about Hall. He just hasn't lived up to it. Now Bambose, on the other hand, he is making his UFC debut. There is a little bit of buzz and hype around him as a prospect as well. He's 27 years old, so he's still young, and he'll be improving as well. But he is still raw. I mean, he's replacing Riggs on short notice, so he is taking this fight, without a full camp here. So that's got to come into play here. But Bambose is more of a basically your striking-based fighter for sure. He's got a Taekwondo background. He's a former Ring of Combat middleweight champion, which is a very solid organization outside of the UFC, on the lower scale a little bit there, but some talented fighters have definitely, come out of that organization as well. So getting back to Bambose, he's more of your heavy-handed striking-based fighter. He's effectively wild on the feet, meaning that, he does tend to wing some big punches at times, but he's got some speed, and power to go along with it. So he's very dangerous, but he is still raw. Really, for most, at 185. I mean, his cardio isn't concerned as well, because most of the time he gets his opponents out there in the first round. I mean, he's a quick finisher. So there's a lot of question marks surrounding Bambose in this fight. So you have to kind of lean towards what you know with Hall, even though it's just frustration that comes out of you with a guy like Uriah Hall, because he could be so much better. But this is kind of a tough one to bet. I mean, again, people seem to always bet Hall up, and then they end up getting burnt and then kind of complain about it. Well, I mean, I honestly think around 3-1, the price that was originally set was a fair line, because you don't know which Hall is going to show up. I mean, in this fight, he actually should be able to weather the early storm, and I think he should be able to take over and possibly finish Bambose as the fight goes on, because, I mean, again, he is the more solid fighter. He's ahead of the game right now as far as overall skill set goes, and Bambose is still developing as a fighter. But Bambose is going to be very dangerous, and it's a tough one to bet. Laying 3-4-1 against a striker that can really, with the aggression that he's got, the power and speed, that can end your night with one shot, it's kind of tough. So I think Bambose is going to have more success down the road. I just don't know if he's going to win this fight. So I'm not really that confident in Hall, but at the same time, I got to pick him, because I know that at this point he's farther ahead, like I said. So should be an awesome fight. Hopefully they stand and bang and give us all an impressive show, because that's what we want to see in this matchup. And we might get it. But either way, I think you have to kind of lean towards Hall. But as far as the bet goes, be cautious out there if you guys are, again, going to put Hall in parlays and just kind of bet him out there, because just not sold on him. He's got to put a few more quality wins together and just kind of get that fight IQ turned around a little bit before you can really depend on him, is my take. So my official pick is going to be Hall, though.
Yeah, if this fight stays standing, it could be not just a good fight, but potentially the best fight of the whole card. Bambose is a pretty good prospect, but he is one of those guys that is 100 miles an hour, pedal to the metal, push forward, try to knock your block off. And against a guy like Uriah Hall, there's potential. There's two ways this fight could go. Hall has a big tendency to just sit back and let the fight happen way too much. It's forced him to lose multiple decisions that he shouldn't have lost. I mean, he lost to Rafael Natal because of that. He lost to Kelvin Gastelum because of that. He lost to John Howard because of that. So against a guy like Bambos, if Bambos is really aggressive and just outworks him, then he could either put Hall away, which he does have the power to do, or he could win a decision if Hall is content to sit back and try to just, pick away at Bambos from distance. Now, the other thing that could potentially be in Hall's favor is he is such a diverse and powerful striker and an incredible athlete. And if Bambos is charging forward and being super reckless like he usually does in most of his fights, he's going to leave a lot of monstrous openings for counter strikes. I mean, it's going to be the easiest counter-strike fight of Uriah Hall's career, as long as Bambos just does anything similar to how he's performed on any of his tape before this fight, including, just a fight that he had earlier this January. So there's really not a whole lot of room for improvement since he's been fighting like that all year. So if Hall is able to counter-strike effectively, he's going to knock Bambos' head off. I mean, hands down. It just all depends on if Hall is in this game mentally properly prepared, and he should be able to do that. But that being said, you never know with Uriah Hall. Sometimes he just isn't quite there. And the other thing that you got to factor in is, I believe this fight was originally going to be a welterweight contest. Hall was going to drop down to the welterweight division to face Joe Riggs, and Riggs ended up dropping out of the fight. And then when they decided to ask Hall to face Bambos, it ended up being a middleweight contest. So I expect that maybe Hall's depleted a little bit of his muscle mass while preparing to make the welterweight cut. So that could affect his performance in this fight. And honestly, if Bambos is able to just push forward and overwhelm Hall, he could get the knockout. But that being said, if this fight goes the full distance, I expect Hall to win a decision because Bambos, really, with the way he fights, he's going to run out of steam after one round. He's really just puts way too much energy and power into everything he does, and it's going to tire him out. So I would expect Hall to either win the second and third rounds and take a decision, or just counter-strike effectively and put Bambos out cold. So this is Uriah Hall's fight to lose. It feels like a picture-perfect type of matchup for Hall to take advantage of, but stranger things have happened. But I am going to pick Uriah Hall. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 main card, we have a flyweight contest between Ray Borg, who is 8-1, and Gene Herrera, who is 8-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Borg minus 475, the comeback on Herrera plus 325, and right now it's Borg minus 470, the comeback is plus 375. So line margins again kind of tighten up a little bit. A little bit more action is coming in on Borg, but nothing significant. There's going to be a lot of, I think, two-way action here, especially considering where the line is. I mean, Borg definitely is an absolute stud. I think, he's had some controversial fights already in the UFC, especially I mentioned earlier with Ortiz. I thought he should have got the nod there. He deserved to get that nod, and he didn't. And that would have honestly launched him to a whole nother level. But he's going to get there. He's still, again, young. He's only 21 years old. And he's really put himself in a good spot amongst the UFC flyweights for sure. So a couple wins, again, for Borg, and I think he can definitely, knock on that title door. Now, Herrera, on the other hand, man, I'm almost disappointed by this matchup. And not in a bad way. It's just because you have a guy in Herrera that's making his official UFC debut. That's an absolute stud. And I'm upset because you're going to eliminate, I think, in my opinion, two really good, talented prospects. One of these guys is going to have to lose. And, obviously, according to the odds and according to how everything should play out, it's probably going to be Herrera. But why I'm disappointed is, man, because this guy could make his debut and just really impress, especially if matched with a little bit of an easier fight. But, again, that tells you the level of respect I think the UFC, Shelby, and crew, everybody has for Herrera, because they're putting him in there against a guy that they know can make a run at a title in Borg. So Herrera, they think, is game, and he's got the ability to compete with a guy like Borg. And I think it is going to be a close competitive fight, believe it or not. Let's get into Herrera a little bit here first. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He's got more of your Well, I don't want to say. I mean, I guess he's a little bit more well known for his ground game as well. But he is a very complete fighter. He's a great athlete as well. He's a purple belt only in jiu-jitsu. But I'm saying only because his level is actually above purple belt in my opinion. The guy does have a funky, smooth ground game. You know, whether you place him on his back, whether he's in top position as well, anywhere the fight takes place on the ground, Herrera's game, and he's dangerous. I was honestly impressed with his recent RFA win over Josh Rave. That was a pretty solid win. Besides that, though, I mean, Herrera, again, the level of competition he's faced has been fairly weak. So Borg definitely has an advantage in that area. But overall, again, going back to Herrera, he's got a very solid striking game. He utilizes his jab well. On the feet, he's got pretty decent footwork as well, nice clinch work. He's got, as far as takedowns go, he's got some pretty decent throws as well. He's got nice judo throws. He's got good timing with some of those takedowns. And he's got pretty decent takedown defense overall. And if you are able to get him to the floor, he's another one of these fighters that, you know, will make life tough on you, and he manages to find his way back up to his feet more times than not. So solid fight IQ to go along with it for being a young fighter, and just a nice overall game. But this is a huge step up in competition for Herrera and Borg. I mean, Borg is a little spark plug in my opinion. You know, he's got the total package as well. I know Borg is more well known for his wrestling, for his transitioning on the ground. I mean, his jiu-jitsu, his ground game is so fun to watch. It's amazing, really. But on the feet, Borg has some speed. He's got some power. He mixes things up well, switches up stances when he has to. It's a thing of beauty to watch Borg fight, period. But I do think that he is going to struggle with Herrera because Herrera is going to be a little bit longer. Herrera is an aggressive fighter. He's got some power. And again, he's just has that kind of killer finishing instinct. So Borg's going to have to be cautious here. I think we're going to see a lot closer fight than the line currently indicates. But with all that being said, again, with the step up in competition, I'm not sure if Herrera is quite ready for Borg yet. Because again, I think Borg is just on another level compared to most at 125 right now. So I'm going to pick Borg to win this fight. I think even if he doesn't submit Herrera, which I think is a possibility, I think Borg is probably going to end up in top position enough that he ends up stealing this fight. Because even if you do put Borg on his back, you can't keep him there long either. He transitions, he reverses things out, and he ends up getting the better position, more dominant position. Almost every fight you see that with Borg. So I don't think this is going to be that much different. Although it is going to be a big time challenge, I still think that Borg is probably going to come away with a win. But another caution as far as line goes, if you guys have not watched Herrera fight, I don't know if this is a good spot to lay over 4-1 against this guy. So be cautious out there with parlays, with straight bets on Borg, because this is going to be a fight. But my pick is going to be Borg.
The hype train behind Ray Borg is pretty deserved, in my opinion. The kid is extremely talented and one of the better grapplers in the flyweight division in general. And against a guy like Gene Herrera, it could definitely be a situation where you have two really good grapplers, and you know how the saying goes is when you have two good grapplers or two good wrestlers in a fight, sometimes it turns into a stand-up battle. And if that does happen, I think this bout would still be really entertaining, although I'm hoping that we do get to see some groundwork as well, because I think the scrambles in this fight would be extremely pleasing. Regardless, on the feet, I do think Ray Borg will be the better overall, pure technical striker. He has good footwork, he's quick, he's nimble, and he mixes things up really well. Herrera will balance that with trying to throw a lot of power strikes. Now, he's not nearly as technical as Borg, but he does make up for it with the heavy hands. So I would expect that Borg would be doing some dancing around Herrera, trying to pot shot him, and Herrera will just try to get him back with something real heavy. But regardless, I think on the feet, Ray Borg should have an advantage here. And he was on my show this past Sunday night, and he sounded excited about the prospect of getting a chance to showcase all the work he's been doing on the feet. So I would not be surprised one bit if a lot of this fight took place on the feet. Now, in terms of the ground game, both fighters are primarily grapplers. They both have a lot of submissions on their record. Most of their wins have been via the finish on the ground. So I would expect that at some point this fight goes to the ground, whether somebody gets hurt on the feet or if somebody is getting outworked on the feet, and then they decide they need to try at least to take the fight to the canvas. Now, Borg isn't the greatest top control wrestler. He's more of a guy that can drag the fight to the ground and then use his incredible transition ability to get sweeps, to take your back, and all kinds of different things. Herrera is definitely a little more one-dimensional in that department. He definitely needs to get top position and then start working you over. And I think that's going to be a little trickier for him because Borg is a little bit more dynamic on the ground, and he's very, very fluid. Borg just does a lot of really, really interesting technical things that I think will be a bit of above the level of Herrera. Herrera did showcase some solid ability in RFA and before, but he's also not faced anyone even close to the level of Borg in his career yet, even when he was fighting in RFA, which is a good prospect organization that has a feeder league to the UFC. Borg has already stepped in there against a guy like Dustin Ortiz in his UFC debut on short notice and arguably beat him. I mean, that was a really, really close fight. So I think Borg definitely has faced the stiffer competition. He's the more prepared fighter, and I think that he has a little bit more of a well-roundedness to his game compared to Herrera, and I expect Borg to walk away with the win. Maybe he doesn't deserve to be as big a favorite as he is, but I think that's more just because of the name recognition than anything. And I still expect him to get this win. So my pick is going to be Ray Borg. Now moving up to the women's bantamweight division, we have Sarah McMahon, who is 8-2, taking on Amanda Nunez, who is 10-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened McMahon minus 265, the comeback on Nunez plus 185, and right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is McMahon minus 245, the comeback on Nunez is plus 205. So a little bit of early action did come in on Nunez, and the line dropped, and some action coming back in on McMahon now. So line staying pretty steady, almost 2.5 to 1. It looks like across the board on Don Best as well. And I think it's a pretty fair spot. I know Nunez, a lot of people might be surprised because Nunez is definitely a very game fighter, very dangerous fighter. She's been looking better overall recently. And in fact, against Kat Zingano, who just recently fought for the title, she was really looking good, especially in round 1, had Kat in all sorts of trouble, but then eventually faded and got beat in that fight as well. But overall, she's faced some decent competition and she's fared well. And I think she's another type of fighter that as her career goes on, we're going to see some improvements in her game. I mean, she's still only 27 years old. In women's MMA, especially 135, I think she is kind of has the label, even though she's young, she's still a savvy vet as well. I mean, she's faced pretty good competition. She doesn't lack any experience either, and she's, again, going to continue to improve her game. So the best part of her game, though, I do think is, honestly, her striking. She's very powerful on the feet. She definitely has knockout power, especially for, again, the women's bantamweight division. In her top position on the ground, I mean, she has a little bit of underrated offensive wrestling, and once she does get on top, I mean, she drops some bombs. She's able to finish the fight on the ground as well. She does lack a little bit in some takedown defense. She lacks in cardio a little bit as well. And then her overall submission skill could be a little bit better as well. She does have some subs. She has the ability to finish it that way. She just doesn't really use it as much as she should at times. So Nunez is a very dangerous fighter, and in this fight with McMahon, she's going to have to try to keep this fight upright. Maybe, use her clinch work, which is pretty decent as well, to be effective and just kind of keep McMahon at bay a little bit. She's going to be a slightly longer fighter, and again, she should have overall a slight stand-up edge, but I'm not so sure how that is going to match up because McMahon has been improving her overall game. It's funny because, in my opinion, outside of Rousey, a little while ago, McMahon was honestly considered the second best, I think, bantamweight women's fighter. But she did suffer, obviously, that devastating quick loss to Ronda Rousey, and then coming off of a lackluster performance against Murphy, and then her last fight where she lost a close competitive decision to Miesha Tate. That she was actually winning that fight. She made a mistake in that third round and got put on her back, and she had some problems with Miesha Tate's top control, and she couldn't get out, so she ended up losing that fight. So you could understand it, I guess. Her stock has actually dropped a little bit. So I think people are underestimating McMahon at this point. In my opinion, again, she's a wrestler. She has that background. She's a dominant wrestler. She's able to dictate and control the tempo of the fight. She's able to get most people on their backs. She doesn't do all that much once she is in top position. That's one thing that I think she could be a little bit busier at times, a little bit more effective with her ground and pound. But her positional control is definitely solid. And on the feet, I think she's actually developing a decent striking game as well. Her boxing actually looks okay. She's got a little bit of power, probably underrated power on the feet. She's got a little bit of speed. So she's nothing to honestly overlook at all. And in fact, in this fight with Nunez, I think she's going to have to probably weather an early storm. Nunez is going to be aggressive like she always is early in round 1. I think McMahon's just going to have to weather it. And if she does get past Nunez early, she's going to probably end up taking over and dominating round 2 and round 3, to be honest with you. If it even goes that far, I think there's a good chance that with Nunez cardio being such a flaw in her game, I think that there's a good chance McMahon ends up possibly finishing Nunez late in that fight as well. So for me, even though a lot of people might disagree, I do think McMahon still has something left. She has something left to prove. I think she's still one of the best fighters at 135, and I think she's going to eventually find her way back to a title shot with Rousey. And I still think that, as far as skill set for skill set, even though Rousey blew through her, I think that McMahon still presents some interesting problems for anybody in the weight class, including Rousey a little bit. I'm not saying she's going to be Rousey, so don't quote me like that, but I'm saying that I still think that outside of the top tier girls, McMahon should be right there with them as well. So I think she does get this win over Nunez, gets back on track a little bit, and depending on how they match her up, we could see her a couple more wins, get that shot back at Rousey and get a little bit more of that respect back. For Nunez, again, I don't think it's going to fare too well. I think she's going to be a little bit exposed here in this fight, and I think she's going to probably have to get back and work on her cardio issues, and that's probably what's going to hinder her in this fight. So my official pick is McMahon. I think she is going to win at least a clear decision, if not finish Nunez late here as well.
Amanda Nunez is a talented fighter, but for only so long. I mean, she had Katzengano on the ropes in her fight, but just couldn't quite put her away and then just ran out of steam. That's been the story of a lot of fights in her career. She's able to either finish fights quickly and dominate them, or she runs out of gas and then either loses a decision or gets finished. And against a lot of the top fighters, she usually isn't able to get that finish, and then she ends up on the receiving end. So against Sarah McMahon, McMahon is a little bit beatable in terms of what Amanda Nunez presents. I mean, Nunez is a decent overall striker. She's very aggressive. So if she could overwhelm McMahon, she could put her away. McMahon doesn't have a great chin or anything. So maybe Nunez could take her out if she just bull rushes her. But if that doesn't work, then I would expect Sarah McMahon to rebound and then utilize that Olympic level wrestling. And then Nunez is not good off of her back whatsoever. Her ground game, while she's in top position, is pretty nasty. She has some good ground and pound. She lands some heavy shots. But the second that she runs out of steam and winds up on her back, that's where she gets exposed. Katzengano blistered her in their fight, and then in terms of Alexis Davis in Strikeforce, Alexis was able to get on top of her and mount her and then just start dropping down some punishment. And even though it wasn't the most powerful shots, it was more than enough because Nunez could not get out of the way. So I think in this fight, it's all about whether or not Nunez can get that quick finish, because if she can't get the finish, then McMahon's just going to overwhelm her over the course of the fight. So I'm picking Sarah McMahon. I just think that her Olympic caliber wrestling is going to be enough. And I think Amanda Nunez at some point is going to gas out and probably get finished maybe in the third round. So my pick is Sarah McMahon. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they agree. I mean, first of all, Amanda Nunez is dangerous. I mean, her offensive striking stats are superior in every way to Sarah McMahon. She gets a clean sweep. She's even got a reach advantage and a sizable youth advantage, but she hits harder, she hits more accurately, and she goes faster than Sarah McMahon, at least in terms relative to her opponents. So on the feet, especially early on, as you guys said, she is dangerous. But on the mat, McMahon gets a clean sweep in the metrics. Her wrestling obviously is going to be superior. Nunez, she is a BJJ practitioner, pretty high level. She hasn't been afraid to go to the mat, but there was a huge difference when she was on offense and fresh against Katzengano, and then we saw her completely fade, and she was really owned on the mat badly in that fight, and eventually finished. So McMahon is going to have the cardio advantage here. There's no doubt about it. You've got an Olympic wrestler. She clearly is going to be prepared for that. So if she can weather that early storm, not get herself into any trouble, not overcommit, I think she can be a more conservative fighter early on, and then as the fight transitions, she can overtake. But because of the disparity in the numbers here, I would be very uncomfortable laying more than 2-1 juice on McMahon for this, because she is potentially vulnerable. Amanda is a dangerous fighter, and maybe she's gotten past that cardio issue. We simply don't know. It's close enough on paper because of the differences here that I would probably back off this one. So I think ultimately you can assume that if it does get out of the first round, it's going to be McMahon's fight. If it ends early, it's probably a Nunez, striking finish, maybe even a submission, who knows, but she's primarily a striker, and that's how she wins her fights, is by TKO, but she has never won a decision. So a McMahon decision is probably the most likely outcome, but it's still a close call, and don't pay too much for it.
Now moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Jared Rashal, who is 12-2, taking on Timothy Johnson, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Rashal minus 230 to come back on Johnson, plus 170, and right now it's Rashal minus 245 to come back on Johnson, plus 205. So a little bit more action coming in on Rashal, a lot of parlays there as well early on. And this is kind of a tough fight as well because, Rashal, in my opinion, is a very solid fighter. Obviously, he's got the wrestling background with a lot of power to go along with it. And another guy that keeps on improving, throughout his UFC career. But he does have some flaws in his game, for sure, and we'll get into that as well. Now, Johnson, on the other hand, if you look at his overall game, you look at him physically, everything about him, you almost can't take the guy serious. I'm not saying that in a negative way. It's just, he surprises you in a lot of ways with his wrestling ability, with his knockout power, and his capabilities overall as a fighter. You don't expect it, but it is what it is. The guy is definitely a dangerous fighter, especially in the clinch, but we'll get into them more here in a second. So as far as matchup goes, honestly, between Rashal and Johnson, you have two former wrestlers kind of going at it here. Of course, Rashal's pedigree is a little bit higher, because Johnson was a Division III All-American wrestler. Still, though, I think that as far as how they match up in the actual octagon, it's going to be tough because I don't think Rashal's going to have a tremendous amount of success just ragdolling Johnson like sometimes he might be used to. So it could get dangerous at times as well. Now, Johnson is, again, more of your wrestling-based fighter as well, but he's more of your I don't want to say striking-based fighter, but he is. More so the clinch than anywhere else. But he's a southpaw on the feet, which makes things a little bit interesting. He is the type of fighter that loves to put constant pressure on you and likes to get in close, really, to work his clinch game because, again, he is the most effective in the clinch. If he does get some takedowns, he has very heavy ground and pound from top position. And then he, obviously if you look at his debut win, the kind of bombs he could drop once he is, from on mount is really something to say as well. So he is a finisher. He's got that killer instinct for sure. But to be honest with you, as far as distance on the feet goes, his striking offense and defense are about average. They're nothing really that special with Johnson. So I really think that Rashal, from distance on the feet, is the better striker. He might not be the more dangerous striker because I think still Johnson might have a little bit more pure knockout power, but still I think as far as technique goes, skill goes, Rashal from a distance on the feet has a little bit of an edge. Now, Rashal will probably want to try some takedowns in this fight and clinch up against the cage with Johnson. I think that's probably what's going to get him in a little bit of trouble along the way, because if any flaws in kryptonite in Roshal's game, it's that chin. He's been knocked out a couple times now. He's been staggered and rocked more than that as well. So strike defense for Rashal, it's not the greatest thing. And again, he likes to get inside as well and clinch, and that's exactly where Johnson is strongest at. So this is a very interesting fight, and I've honestly, as far as a pick goes, I've been going back and forth with it because even though Johnson's not overly impressive in his game, I think style-wise, Rashal's a pretty good matchup for him because I think they will neutralize each other with the wrestling, and a lot of this fight will kind of play out in close range as well, so that could lean and feed right into the hands of Johnson. But ultimately, Rashal, I think if his chin does hold up, he probably wins a fight because he's going to be, I think, the more effective striker overall. He's going to probably be the slightly better wrestler where he can control and dictate the tempo of the fight throughout. And it is his fight to win or lose. Now, can he lose it? Yes, but I do think he's probably going to get the win. But again, going back and forth on this is a tough one. I am going to pick Rashal, though, officially to get the nod here. Another spot where I know a lot of people are probably going to maybe want to fade Johnson. Just be careful because his knockout power, even though it's not really the flashiest stuff, it's there. And Rashal's chin is definitely a question mark. So my official pick is going to be Rashal, but just be careful.
Yeah, this is a tricky fight, but mainly because Jared Rashal is a bit unreliable at times. I mean, the guy has incredible wrestling, but his cardio isn't the best, and his chin is definitely a question mark. I mean, he's been hurt in multiple fights. Walt Harris was able to stun him in his UFC debut, and then in his one of his more recent fights, Olenek was able to put him out just with strikes. So that is something you have to keep an eye on. But against a guy like Timothy Johnson, he doesn't really have to worry about that on the feet, at least. Johnson is definitely not a seasoned striker in the stand-up portion at all. He's much more of a get on top of you and just start pounding away at you, or push you into the fence and just start unloading. He's very, very awkward in open space. And I think actually Jared Rashal will be the better striker in open space. He has some pretty crisp technical boxing, and he had Olenek in a bit of trouble. He was swarming him, and then he just got clipped. So as long as he can avoid that big bomb from Timothy Johnson, I think Rashal will be in decent shape here. Johnson is a good wrestler, but Rashal was, almost an All-American level wrestler at Oklahoma State. So I would expect Rashal to get the better of Johnson during grappling exchanges, and if he wants to take Johnson down, he probably will be able to. And I think he has a good enough wrestling that he can avoid getting taken down. Now, in terms of how they would act on the ground, we haven't really seen much out of Johnson off of his back yet. I mean, really his UFC debut, he got the takedown, he advanced to a dominant position, postured up, and just started pounding away until his opponent couldn't, respond. Rashal, on the other hand, he's much more composed on the ground. He's not going to take a lot of huge risks. He will land the occasional elbow and punch to try to keep that position and not get stood up, but he's not going to give you a ton of space just to try to drop down a ton of punishment. So that is where their differences lie in terms of how they act on the ground. But really, the only way I see Johnson winning this fight is if he can pressure Rashal into the fence and start working him over in the clinch, because he does have some decent clinch striking and some good transition striking. And if he is somehow able to get Rashal on his back, because that's really where Johnson shines, is that ground and pound. He has some nasty, heavy strikes when he's on top of you. But just like Soa Palele, it's tough. If he can't get to that position, I don't see how he wins. And I'm not quite sure he's going to be able to get to that position, so I don't see how he wins against Jared Rashal, barring, a wild haymaker that clips Rashal on the chin as he comes in. So I think this is Jared Rashal's fight to lose, and I'm going to pick him. Now dropping down to the middleweight division, we have Derek Brunson, who is 13-3, taking on Sam Alvi, who is 25-6 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Brunson minus 210, the comeback on Alvi plus 160, and this has had the most movement thus far out of all the lines I set for this card. It is now Brunson minus 450, the comeback on Alvi is plus 360. This was definitely a head scratcher for me, only because I was surprised with the amount of people that actually were supporting early on, at least, as far as picks and out there for Alvi. A lot of people believe that Alvi has definitely gained some respect, and he could present some problems for Brunson along the way. But honestly, the bettors obviously have not agreed with that aspect, and they've come in pretty hard on Brunson. Now, of course, along the way, you do make some adjustments. In fact, yesterday I tweeted out 5 Dimes was going to make some adjustments to the line, and they actually increased it from 3-1 to 4-1 at one spot, one point along the way too. So they do make some adjustments along the way. That way they don't get buried on on a fight or so along the way, which is a smart idea, obviously. So they're trying to attract some dog action back in on Alvi to even things out a little bit here, which I think is a smart move, because I do think stylistically it is a very difficult fight for Alvi. Now, I have a lot of respect for Alvi. In fact, we put him in premium and he's been successful for us. So he's been making us some cash. And that being said, because he's always underestimated in fights. He's got pretty solid wrestling defense. He's able to usually keep the fight upright and end up, even though he doesn't look like the flashiest striker and he's not always the most active striker, he does have that sneaky, crazy good knockout power. I mean, if you look at the guy, he's got 17 wins by knockout on his resume, which is really impressive because, again, he just doesn't look like he's that type of fighter. But he's got good accuracy. He's got really good fight IQ. He studies his opponents very well. And he's got a pretty well-rounded game. And of course, training with Hendo and crew over at Team Quest has only helped his confidence, only helped his wrestling game, everything across the board. So I do respect Alvi. And I do think that he belongs in the UFC middleweight division, and he can obviously continue to win fights. It's just stylistically in this fight, I don't think he's going to have that much success. He's going to need to sprawl and brawl against Brunson. Brunson has really good wrestling. He's improving his stand-up game as well along the way, and he mixes things up a little bit better. He's a little bit more aggressive than Alvi on the feet, even though Brunson might be not really well known for his striking. I think that here in this spot against Alvi, he's probably going to be the more active, the busier striker along the way, maybe a little bit more effective as well. He just has to be cautious if he is striking with Alvi a little bit, because Alvi, again, has that sneaky knockout power. And if there's any question marks or concerns about Brunson, it's definitely his chin. I mean, in the past, he's had some cardio concerns, and again, he's been clipped, rocked, knocked out. So in my mind, there's no question that if Alvi lands properly, he can knock Brunson out as well. So, but I really do think that Brunson's game plan here is going to be to close the distance, get inside, take Alvi down, control him on the ground, and probably grind Alvi out along the way. Of course, all of it's going to be set up by Brunson's striking attack on the feet first, so that's where the danger again comes into play a little bit, but I do think that Brunson should be okay. He is improving. Even his strike defense has gotten better. And I do think that Brunson, I mean, you got to give him a little bit of credit. I know he was only really truly knocked out by Jacare, and Jacare has a little bit of underrated power on the feet. And then, of course, that war that he had with Romero. So I don't think Alvi's going to be able to do that sort of thing with Brunson this time, and I do think it's Brunson's fight to win or lose. So even though the line now is getting a little crazy because it's minus 450 for Brunson at 5 dimes, but again, with some adjustments being made, I think the line's a little high. But I do think that Brunson's going to win the fight, so it's hard to argue with some of the early action coming in and the way it's going to play out. So it's Brunson's fight to win or lose, and I am going to pick Brunson to win.
Yeah, this is a really intriguing stylistic matchup. In terms of a pure stand-up battle, I actually think that both guys have about the same amount of power. Maybe Alvi is a little bit more, but Derek Brunson showcased that he can clearly take anybody out in his last fight against Ed Herman, where he just completely steamrolled him. Now, with Alvi, he showcased some excellent power as well, multiple knockouts in the UFC, including his last 2 emphatic finishes. So you always have to be on the lookout for the knockout from Alvi. But against Brunson, I think it's going to be a little trickier because Brunson is a quicker, more agile type of fighter, and he's not just going to stand right in front of Alvi and take his best shot. He's going to mix it up. He's going to look for some good high kicks. Brunson really does a great job of keeping his attack a little bit more diverse. And then if all else fails, Brunson has a really solid overall wrestling game. I mean, he took down Yoel Romero multiple times. So, that just speaks to just how good he can be in terms of his wrestling. So against a guy like Alvi, really, Alvi's going to have a puncher's chance in this fight. He's not going to win a scrambling battle. He's not going to win in the clinch. He's not going to win a decision unless he hurts Brunson in every round and isn't able to finish him. And the only way he's going to win is by knockout. Alvi has a lot of power, but his biggest problem is sometimes he just sits back a little bit and lets the fight happen way too much. And, that's how he ended up losing his UFC debut against Tom Watson. I mean, he just sat back. Watson brought the fight to him, and then by the time Alvi finally woke up and started really going after it in the 3rd round, it was too late, and he couldn't get the finish, and he lost a decision. So I could see something like that happening against Brunson. It's just all about whether or not Alvi connects with that big right hand of his. I mean, he has some monstrous power, and I just think that Brunson is going to be a little bit too much for him. He's probably going to be very aggressive on the feet, and then the second Alvi starts to try to fire back, I think Brunson's going to duck below his strikes and then take him down. So this is a battle between a guy that's a bit of a one-trick pony, although it's an extremely effective one-trick pony in Sam Alvi, against somebody that is just way more well-rounded, that also has that power, but can mix it in with all kinds of different other attacks, and has just as much power with his kicks as he does his hands in Derek Brunson. So I just think the well-roundedness of Brunson's game is going to be way too much for Alvi, and he's just going to either win a decision or finish him. I just think this is absolutely Derek Brunson's fight to lose. So I'm going to pick him. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the numbers definitely say Brunson is going to have huge advantage on the ground. Sam Alvey hasn't even attempted a single takedown in his UFC career. He's been taken down a couple times, although to his credit, he didn't spend a lot of time down there, and he was able to even keep it neutralized. So he has effectively kept it standing, and he's not a aggressive striker. Sam Alvey only averages not even 7 standing strikes per minute while standing. He lets opponents outpace him, but he's looking for that counter strike, and he is very, very accurate with his power hand. He swings for the fences. He hardly uses his jab at all, and he has knocked people out. Now, looking closer at some of those names, there were some guys with questionable chins that he knocked, and he was able to expose them. Derek Brunson may fit that mold too. His chin rating is below average. It's not that he's been knocked out a ton, but numerically, punch for punch, it is something to be concerned about. However, he does have pretty good defense. He doesn't get too sloppy in terms of, getting into a barn burner. He's dangerous, arguably more dangerous with his own hands. And he's got the wrestling that is going to have to keep Alvi honest in defending those takedowns. And that combination makes it a hard fight for Alvi to be looking for a big counter, huge swing to knock out Brunson on the way in, but also having to defend takedown attempts. Brunson is going to have the longer arms, not a huge age differential here. Both men are southpaws, which is interesting, so they both might be a little bit more hesitant. So overall, there's a lean here towards Brunson with a caveat that Alvi has been very crafty at finding people's chins, and Brunson, like everyone else before him, has a chin that could be rocked and hurt. So I would lean Brunson here, assuming he fights smart, he doesn't get too crazy, which I think he can do, and just take Sam Alvi down and grind him out. And standing, it's not like Brunson is going to be terrible. He's going to be landing some heavy shots himself. Alvi needs to be worried about that. So overall, the numbers here lean Brunson.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Michael Johnson, who is 17-8, taking on Darius, who is 11-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Johnson opens minus 245 to come back on Darius, plus 175. And right now, over at 5 times, there has been some significant action coming in on the dog. And it is now Darius plus 140, and the line on Johnson is actually minus 160. So there is a little bit of two-way support, even though the line opened a little bit higher. I think the line right now overall has drawn enough two-way action where it's not a big decision either way for 5 dimes. And some of the other sports books have since copied and put it out about $1.50, $1.60 or so. So it seems like that's the market price here. This is a tough fight. I mean, I've been a big fan of both these guys, honestly, more so Johnson. He's made us some money because a lot of people would just underestimate this guy's ability to improve and, his ability to actually stuff takedowns and just batter people on the feet. I mean, he's got some of the best striking, I think, in the division, and he's proven it time and time again. So finally, I think people are going to realize what this guy could do if he's able to keep the fight upright. And one thing that I think in the past has been a little bit of flaw from Johnson, of course, it is his ground game. I mean, once he is put on his back, he does have some problems on the ground against good jiu-jitsu guys, against really better wrestlers as well. I mean, he has had some, problems there, but a lot of that, I think, honestly, you could say was because of his cardio. He started slowing down after round 1 in fights. Now with the Black Zillion camp, I mean, he spent so much time there, enough time that it's actually really starting to soak in. His cardio's gotten better. His takedown defense has improved a little bit. Just from top to bottom, I mean, I think Johnson has definitely developed into a more complete fighter with proper training and good, solid training partners and coaches. I mean, it's definitely paid dividends for him. So Johnson is a beast, no doubt about it on the feet. I think he is one of the most dangerous and effective strikers there is at 155 for sure, and he deserves that. But Darius, on the other hand, too, man, I guess originally I wasn't quite sure when Darius made his UFC debut what we're going to get from him, because on tape, again, footage, level of competition was all a little bit weaker. So I wasn't really sure what to expect, but he ran through Brenneman, and he looked pretty good, but there were still some question marks around him. And then the next fight against Nijum, he gets knocked out. And a lot of people were, really surprised. And I think his stock dropped big time there. I mean, even though Nijam at that time was probably getting more respect than he's getting right now, still kind of a bad loss, only your second fight in. But then he's rattled off some really impressive wins. He showed a lot of heart and toughness against Martin. And his fight against Herrera, he was actually really impressive in that fight. He showcased, outstanding wrestling and grappling against a really good BJJ practitioner there. So that started turning the corner for me as far as skill set goes. I mean, he showed some really good wrestling, and again, some really good groundwork, which I wasn't that surprised with, but his ability and his improvement definitely showed through. And then again, against Cruikshank, really impressive. And then even his last fight against Miller has been towards the top of the food chain, in the UFC lightweight division for a long time. So Darius was impressive in that fight. So really, I think that loss against Nijam now dating back was honestly more of a fluke than anything else. Because if you match Nijam up against Darius these days, I think Darius probably finishes him and runs through him, honestly. So I'm impressed. I mean, the guy's getting better. Again, he's training at a very solid camp with King's MMA and crew over there. Outstanding as far as his ability to improve his stand-up game. He's honestly has some length on the feet, and he knows how to use it. I mean, he could be very dangerous. Both these fighters are southpaws. So even if it stays up, Johnson definitely has a significant edge on the feet because I think he's got the better chin. And again, he is the more dangerous and explosive striker. But Darius can do some damage. I mean, you can't sleep on his striking these days either. So I think on the feet it's going to be competitive, but Johnson will definitely have the edge. But I don't think it's going to play out on the feet. I honestly, even though Johnson has definitely gotten better and improved his takedown defense and his ground skill, Darius is still, I think, a level above him there. And I think that Darius, he has a little bit of he's a little unorthodox as far as his takedowns go and how he goes about them, but I think he will be able to get the fight to the floor. I think he'll eventually be able to trip Johnson down. And once he's on top, Darius is a beast to deal with. I think he's going to be able to honestly probably find position and get the finish and submission win over Johnson along the way. If not, I think he'll be able to at least control with those takedowns enough that he'll probably steal a competitive decision along the way. But I think it really is Darius's fight to win or lose. So this matchmaking is really good because you got two guys that are really trying to make a case for themselves as far as being, in the mix for a potential future title shot. And just the way these guys match up, it really is almost more of your striker versus grappler matchup. Even though these guys have improved and became more complete fighters, I mean, that's how it's going to play out here. Johnson's going to want to stand and bang here. He's going to want to sprawl and brawl. And Darius is going to want to take this fight to the floor and work his submission game. So I really do think the way it plays out, even if Johnson's having some success early, I think Darius is going to get the fight again to the floor. I think he's going to have a lot of success there. He's probably going to finish this fight by sub. So I have to pick Darius out there. I know there's, again, some action coming in kind of both ways, but it is going to be a competitive fight. It's going to probably be one of the best fights on the card. Looking forward to it, but my official pick is going to be on the underdog Darius. I think he is going to win.
Yeah, Darius has come a really long way in his UFC career already. When he first debuted, I mean, he was a little bit limited, but now he's really started to put it all together. I mean, the guy has a world-class ground game, and his striking has improved by leaps and bounds. He has power. He has really good kicking ability. That was what he really showcased in the last fight against Cruikshank. He actually outkicked Cruikshank, where kicks are his specialty. So that's really something he can hang his hat on. And he does enter this fight as a southpaw. I think both these guys are southpaws. So that'll be very interesting to see the dynamic of how they match up with each other in that department. The biggest thing that's scary with Darius is, even though he is incredibly talented and dangerous, he does have some chin issues. So if Johnson is able to pressure him and get inside, he could hurt him and put him away. I mean, Ramsey Nijem did knock him out. Tony Martin had him in a little bit of trouble. So those are things you have to consider, because this is by far, hands down, the toughest fight that Beneil Darius has ever had. So a huge step up in competition for him. But it is still a winnable fight because of Johnson's flaws. Johnson, he does a great job on the feet. He has good footwork. He has a high pace, but his biggest issue throughout his career has been submission defense. He's been submitted multiple times, including multiple times in the UFC, and he's been out-wrestled before, and he's facing, in my opinion, the best jiu-jitsu guy that he's ever faced. And Darius isn't just a pure BJJ guy. He's a solid striker, and he actually has some really good takedowns, unlike, maybe like Joe Lozon, who Johnson was just able to batter on the feet and then keep at distance and avoid, some of those desperation takedowns. That's not going to be the case against Darius. I think Darius is going to be a lot more methodical and calculated with his takedown attempts, and he should be able to get Johnson down when he wants to. Now, what Johnson does great is it's all about constant forward pressure. That's actually how he was able to beat Edson Barboza in his last fight. He was just so in Barboza's grill that Barboza wasn't able to sit down, sit on his punches, and get those big kicks off from range. So the problem, though, of course, is Barboza wasn't a takedown threat. So Johnson had, no issues with getting inside on him. And if he does that against Darius, he'd better put him away quickly, because otherwise he's going to be giving Darius an opportunity to just grab him and either take him down or get him in the clinch and work for takedowns. So this is a completely different stylistic matchup for Johnson, and I think it's going to be a really tough one. If Johnson cannot knock Darius out, then I think either Darius can get some things going from distance with his kicks, and then eventually get this fight to the canvas and submit Johnson. So I'm going to pick Beneil Darius. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, the biggest number on the page is, first of all, the number of knockdowns that Johnson has. It's kind of crazy. He has turned into a very effective striker. His last fight with Edson Barboza, one of the best strikers in the game, Johnson went toe-to-toe with this guy, and he won. He just had the better defense. He was landing more punches, and he was pushing his opponent around the cage, which is exactly what he needed to do against a kicker. This is a completely different matchup, but we've now seen that Johnson's stand-up game is dominant to the point where if he is standing and trading with someone, he's probably going to run away with it. He does have power. He's hard to hit. He keeps good range, especially for a lightweight 74-inch reach, and he's a southpaw. So there's a lot of reasons why Darius doesn't want this on the feet. And then the obvious answer to that is Darius's ground stats are a clean sweep over Johnson. Johnson simply doesn't use his ground game very much. He doesn't go for a lot of takedowns. And it's normally his opponents who are trying to take him down to get it out of the striking game. And they've been, not very successful. His takedown defense is very good at 78%. But because he almost never attempts his own takedowns, his ground share control time is very skewed. He is generally out-wrestled on the ground simply because he's not the one initiating. Darius, on the other hand, completely the opposite. He is attempting a lot of takedowns. He's landing them with good success. He's averaging 2.5 advances per takedown. So that means he's basically getting to side control, getting to mount, getting to the back, finding ways to improve his position, which has kept him on the ground for quite a long time. And he's got a fair bit of submissions. So I think everybody is seeing this as a striker versus grappler type matchup, and that's what the numbers say. So that said, each man is very good at where they will presumably be trying to keep the fight at. And so I think the line should stay close. I don't think it should diverge either way here, because then you're just discounting that Johnson could keep this standing and own the matchup. Not to say that Darius' striking is bad, but it's just not as effective as Johnson. And Johnson's no slouch on the ground. It's just he's not going to be able to hang with someone as aggressive with as many submissions as Darius. So these guys perfectly play into each other's strengths and weaknesses, and that's why the line has to stay close here. Numerically speaking, in terms of the competition level, Johnson does get the edge. But stylistically, knowing that his losses have all come on the ground, he's been submitted, and probably by less impressive guys as Darius. And in fact, the only decision Johnson lost was against another high-level grappler, Miles Jury. Didn't get the submission finish, but he still just wrestled him on the ground. So that's a big red flag for laying juice on Johnson. So it makes this matchup very intriguing, very difficult to bet, because it could go either way. And you got to ask yourself, do you believe that Johnson is going to keep this standing, or do you believe that Darius is going to find a way to close the distance and get a trip, get it to the ground, and start working his wrestling, because then he's going to own this. And this is a fight where cage size could come into effect. It's a fight night. It's in a smaller venue. We don't know yet, at least I don't know yet, what size cage it'll be. That could play to Darius's advantage if it was a small cage. But otherwise, not well enough to pick a winner here, but the numbers do support both guys having a case. So it stays close. I do see lots of finishing potential, at least a little bit more than the lightweight average. So maybe it doesn't go to the distance. But I can see Darius is a live dog. I can also see why Johnson has a path to victory. So lots of caveats here. It's a great fight. Too close for me to pick.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a light heavyweight contest between Glover Teixeira, who is 22-4, taking on Ovince St. Preux, who is 18-6. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Teixeira minus 140, the comeback on OSP even money, and right now it is Teixeira minus 120, the comeback on OSP is even money. So line margins tighten up a little bit. There has been some back and forth action coming in on this fight. So the sports books are pretty even right now at the moment. And I think it'll probably be continuing that trend because I think a lot of people will be split on this fight. Teixeira, of course, has fought the best of the best. He's got some really quality wins along the way. Even before he made his UFC debut, I mean, the guy was basically known for his jiu-jitsu. Amazing world-class grappler on the ground, no doubt about it. The guy's phenomenal. He's got really good wrestling. And the awesome part about it is, I mean, with all that ground that I was just mentioning, how good he is and how capable he is on the ground, he's got some serious knockout power, and he's actually a really good striker on the feet as well. So Teixeira is a very complete fighter, a very dangerous fighter in all aspects of the game, and that's why he eventually, and deservingly so, earned a title shot against John Jones. And he did okay in that fight. I mean, did okay by honestly surviving, I guess, as well. I mean, he was outclassed there by Jones, of course, and he got decisively beat. So don't get me wrong, but I'm saying I was actually impressed the guy managed to survive and hold on and take the beating that he did and lose a unanimous decision because he could have got out several times throughout that fight, and his toughness showed. So his cardio has always been a little bit of a question mark in my mind as well, but it seems like he's addressed those issues. So Teixeira is a very game fighter, even though he has lost back-to-back fights now. Of course, the one was to the champion John Jones, and then he had a lackluster performance, a bit surprising performance against Phil Davis as well. Davis was able to use his control and his wrestling to give Teixeira problems in that fight. Here against OSP, it's a different type of matchup. OSP is not going to try to out-grapple Teixeira. OSP is obviously going to try to knock his head off. I mean, that's what OSP does best. He's a big guy. He's going to have some length, of course, over Teixeira. OSP, he's going to have some power to go along with that reach. He is a southpaw, and he has a lot of knockout power on the feet, and he's aggressively wild. And the thing is, we've seen some serious improvements in OSP's game along the way. Dating all the way back to Strikeforce, I mean, you could tell he was something potentially special in those days. He was just an athlete, very athletic, an explosive athlete that was getting better. He was still raw. But now, since he's come into the UFC, he's really been able to put fights together well. He's been improving fight by fight, and he's becoming more of a complete fighter. And he's really addressed some of those issues. His cardio is a little bit better now. His takedown defense has improved. I mean, look at his last fight against Cummins. Cummins had a lot of difficulties getting to the ground. And when he did, I mean, he couldn't hold him there. OSP managed to get back up too. So extremely agile, extremely improving fight by fight, and extremely dangerous is what you get with OSP. And again, I mean, I think his aggression tends to leave some openings, and Teixeira might be able to exploit that along the way. So OSP, I think he needs to tighten up that striking a little bit, but it's working for him. So if that's the case, I mean, his last kind of questionable performance, which he actually performed okay in that fight as well, was against Bader. Bader was able to control that fight again, get some takedowns, and make life a little bit miserable for OSP. But that was a good test for him because OSP got to go 5 rounds against high-level competition. And I think, again, it was kind of more of a learning experience for him as well. So since that time, he's rebounded and he's performed relatively well, beaten some veterans of the sport. Again, especially that win over Shogun was really impressive, how fast he was able to get Shogun out of there. And now he's facing another legend in the sport in Teixeira. So a difficult fight to honestly pick, a difficult fight to honestly bet as well, because this is truly a pick-em type of fight. But from what I've gathered and what I've seen recently, Teixeira might be showing us some signs of a little bit of a decline. And I think with OSP's improvements, this is in Nashville, it's in his backyard as well. I think that I'm leaning a little bit more slightly towards OSP because, I mean, if anything you could say negative about Teixeira, it's honestly his strike defense is not the greatest. I know, again, he managed to survive against a champ. He took a beating there, so you got to give him respect and credit for that. But at the same time, he was rocked in a few fights. Maldonado was able to rock him and had him in a little bit of trouble. Bader was able to rock him and had him in a little bit of trouble in that fight as well. They weren't able to finish the job, and Teixeira was able to, so you got to give Teixeira credit for that as well. But OSP is almost on a different level with crazy knockout power, aggressiveness, and I think once he does clip Teixeira, he'll follow up and probably finish the fight. So that's the kind of knockout power and the kind of ability OSP has. So with all that being said, close fight, tough fight, but I slightly do lean a little bit more towards OSP. I think that his takedown defense is going to be good enough to keep this fight upright. And then on the feet, it's going to be wild, aggressive, and I think he's going to be the more dangerous fighter and the more capable fighter. So I'm going to go his way slightly. So it's OSP for me.
How is Glover Teixeira going to respond to his recent performances? I mean, obviously, the John Jones fight, everybody could have expected that John Jones would end up winning that one. But against Phil Davis, he went into that fight as a pretty good favorite, and Phil Davis just massacred him with excellent wrestling and top control and repeated takedowns. Now, against Ovince St. Preux, that's not nearly going to be the same type of issue. OSP is definitely more of a stand-up fighter, very long, athletic stand-up fighter, very explosive, dangerous guy with a lot of power. And Glover, in this fight, he actually is going to have the wrestling advantage. He's used the wrestling before against guys that are dangerous strikers like Quentin Rampage Jackson. He actually out-wrestled him for the majority of that fight, although he did stand and trade with him a little bit. So it'll be really interesting to see what type of Glover Teixeira shows up, because he looked unmotivated and just lost in his last fight. It's been a long time since that fight against Phil Davis. So it'll be really interesting to see how he looks this time around, how his training has gone. But again, Glover Teixeira is starting to get up there a little bit in years, and OSP is fighting right now the best he's ever fought in his career. He's coming off of back-to-back really impressive first-round finishes of Pat Cummins and Shogun. So he has a lot of confidence right now. They're building him up as a potential title contender. So, and if Ovince St. Preux defeats Glover Teixeira, he's probably next in line behind the Rashad Evans-Ryan Bader winner. So, this fight is really, really important. Now, in terms of how OSP has performed, I think his stand-up, it's still a little sloppy, but he just has so much power and he's so aggressive that it doesn't take much. So it's always going to be really dangerous for Glover if he's standing there and trading, because OSP has such a long reach and he can still hit you so hard with that big left hook he has. Now, in terms of the ground game, St. Preux has been controlled on the canvas multiple times throughout his career. He lost to Ryan Bader. He lost to Gegard Mousasi both times. It was wrestling. So if Glover can get the wrestling going, he could be in good shape. But the problem is St. Preux also has showcased some pretty athletic takedown defense. He used that against Pat Cummins to either avoid takedowns or get up quickly. So it'll be an interesting dynamic to see whether or not St. Preux can stay upright. And even if he can stay upright, Glover has some really good boxing. In terms of chin, as Nick mentioned, Glover hasn't really been knocked down, but he has been wobbled multiple times. So I do feel that St. Preux does have the chin advantage. And in terms of conditioning, I'm going to slightly lean towards Glover for the conditioning. St. Preux has slowed down a lot more in fights, and he definitely slowed down a lot in the Ryan Bader fight. So if this fight does go the full 5 rounds, I think Glover is going to be the one that actually does last a little bit longer. But you also have to factor in that St. Preux is going to be fighting in his backyard of Nashville. So, being a former Tennessee football player, I expect him to have a big backing from the crowd. Maybe that'll rally him a little bit when he is tired and give him a second wind. But overall, I do think that in terms of where these guys are going in their careers right now, this is Ovince St. Preux's fight to lose. He's got a little bit more momentum, and he is a very dangerous fighter on the feet. And while he does have some good submissions and stuff on the ground, and he occasionally does have some top control, he would lose that ground battle. So as long as he can stay upright and crack Teixeira with some good shots, he could be in a good spot here. It just all depends if he tries to avoid being a little too reckless, because Glover could take advantage of that too if he's way too wild on the feet. So I'm going to tentatively pick Ovince St. Preux, but I'm not crazy confident about it. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, ultimately, I think I agree with the conclusions that both of you guys have made. This is very close. It's hard to call, but there is a slight lean towards OSP on paper, at least. He is the younger, longer southpaw, clean sweep there, and he is a very hard hitter. Only 6 career knockdowns, not as many as someone like Michael Johnson, but pound or punch for punch, that's 13.5% knockdown rate. If you've ever seen my charts for the knockdown rate, that is 4 times the average for his division, more than 4 times the average for the light heavyweights. So OSP hits hard. And you're right, Teixeira he's going to be turning 36 soon. He's looked rocked on occasion, and his defense isn't great. He actually lets himself get hit more often than he hits his opponents, and that is consistent. Whereas OSP is a more aggressive striker. He dictates the pace. His accuracy isn't great, but he's also not eating as many punches per exchange as Teixeira is. So on the feet, I give the advantage to OSP. On the ground, it's going to be a question of, does one of these guys try to take it down? Teixeira has a slightly higher takedown attempt rate. It's not much higher. They're almost identical, and they are both slightly below average in terms of the rate at which they attempt takedowns. And they both have very similar takedown accuracy. And then once they're on the ground, very similar advancement rate. So very close back and forth metrics on the ground. Neither one of them really dominant. OSP actually has a higher submission attempt rate, which is strange, at least, once he's on the ground. So there's very back and forth metrics on the ground, very hard to call. I think it boils down to who's in better shape and cardio when it gets to the mat. I don't see either guy having a huge advantage unless one of them gasses. And that's the big question mark for this fight. You have 2 guys who haven't necessarily been Energizer bunnies in the ring. OSP is a very muscled guy. You wouldn't think that he's going to be able to carry a lot of cardio into the later rounds. Certainly for a 5-round fight. Teixeira, he did go 5 rounds with John Jones, but he was basically sitting on the end of a lot of nasty elbows and strikes, not getting much done in that fight, getting picked apart. So Brian mentioned the home cage advantage for OSP. You're right, that might be able to at least inspire him to work a little harder during the later rounds. So ultimately, OSP has more finishing potential. He has the most finishing potential early. But if it gets past round 1, round 2, this becomes a very close matchup because Teixeira is a veteran. He might know how to do just enough to keep it close to get the edge on the cards. So I'm leaning OSP because of the finishing potential and probably the fact that he wins the first couple rounds if it lasts that long. But then Teixeira, depending on how bad the cardio is late in the rounds, Teixeira is still dangerous, still knows how to win rounds later on. You can't count him out, is what I'm saying. So I think ultimately I agree with you. I think OSP is a very viable underdog here, even though it's only a slight underdog. But there is some volatility, but I got to admit that the numbers do slightly lean towards OSP.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 73. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out this Friday night following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. Also, if you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsbreaker.com and you can sign up in the top right corner of our homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dime Sportsbook and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.